The briefcase sat under the oak conference table, less than 6 feet from Adolf Hitler's legs. Inside, a British-made plastic explosive was armed and counting down. In 90 seconds, it would detonate with enough force to kill everyone in the room. Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg excused himself to take a phone call and walked quickly toward the exit, his heart pounding. Outside, he would watch the explosion from a distance, see the wooden conference building shatter, and then rush to the airfield to fly back to Berlin, where his fellow conspirators waited to seize control of the German government. Operation Valkyrie, the most elaborate assassination plot against Hitler in World War II, was finally happening after months of planning and several aborted attempts. In minutes, Hitler would be dead, the Nazi regime would collapse, and Germany could negotiate peace with the Allies before total destruction consumed the nation. At 12:42 p.m. on July 20, 1944, the bomb exploded. The blast tore through the conference room, killed 4 men instantly, wounded 20 others, and sent papers and debris flying through the shattered windows. Stauffenberg, now 100 meters away, saw the explosion and believed completely that Hitler was dead. No one could have survived that blast in an enclosed space. He was wrong. In a twist of fate so improbable it seemed like divine intervention to Hitler's followers, the Führer emerged from the ruins with minor injuries, his trousers shredded and his hair singed, but otherwise alive. The plot that might have ended the war months early, saved hundreds of thousands of lives, and changed the course of history, had failed by inches and moments. The men who tried to kill Hitler would face brutal execution, and their families would suffer under Nazi vengeance. But they would also become symbols of German resistance, proof that not all Germans followed Hitler blindly to destruction. The conspiracy against Hitler had roots reaching back years before July 1944. From the moment Hitler consolidated power in 1933, there were Germans who recognized him as a threat to the nation. These early opponents came primarily from military and aristocratic circles, generals who valued traditional Prussian military honor, conservative politicians who saw Nazism as crude populism, intellectuals who understood where Hitler's racial theories would lead. But opposing Hitler was extraordinarily dangerous. The Gestapo's network of informers penetrated every level of German society. Speaking critically about the regime, even in private, could result in arrest, torture, and execution. Entire families could be punished for one member's disloyalty. The concentration camps weren't just for Jews and communists. They also held Germans who had expressed the wrong opinions at the wrong time. Despite these risks, resistance networks formed. General Ludwig Beck, chief of the Army General Staff, resigned in 1938 in protest of Hitler's aggressive war plans. He warned that Hitler's policies would lead Germany to catastrophe, but his warnings were ignored. Beck became the spiritual center of military resistance, the elder statesman whom younger conspirators looked to for moral authority. Major General Henning von Tresckow, serving on the Eastern Front, witnessed firsthand the atrocities committed by SS units and Wehrmacht soldiers against Soviet civilians and Jews. He was horrified by what he saw and became convinced that Hitler had to be removed to save Germany's honor and prevent total destruction. Colonel General Friedrich Olbricht, head of the General Army Office, provided crucial organizational skills and access to military resources that would be needed for any coup attempt. By 1943, these men and their allies had concluded that assassination was necessary. They had tried working within the system, tried convincing other generals to oppose Hitler, tried leveraging military setbacks to argue for policy changes. Nothing worked. Hitler's grip on power was absolute, his authority unquestioned by the vast majority of Germans who still believed in him despite mounting evidence that the war was lost. The resistance concluded that only Hitler's death would free German soldiers from their personal oath of loyalty to him and enable the military to act against the Nazi regime. Planning an assassination proved extraordinarily difficult. Hitler had survived numerous attempts on his life and had become increasingly paranoid and unpredictable. He changed his schedule without warning, canceled appearances at the last minute, and rarely appeared in public. His food was prepared by specially trained staff and tested for poison. He wore a bulletproof vest. His security was layered and professional. Getting close enough to kill him required someone with legitimate reason to attend military meetings at Hitler's various headquarters. Tresckow made the first serious attempt in March 1943. He convinced a British double agent to provide a British-made bomb disguised as a bottle of Cointreau liqueur. On March 13, during Hitler's visit to Army Group Center headquarters at Smolensk, Tresckow asked Lieutenant Colonel Heinz Brandt to carry the package to Berlin, claiming it was a gift for a friend. Brandt agreed, not knowing he was carrying a bomb set to explode during Hitler's flight. The conspirators armed the device and waited for news of Hitler's plane crashing. Hours passed. Then word came that Hitler had landed safely in Berlin. The bomb had failed to detonate, likely because of the extreme cold in the unpressurized luggage compartment. Tresckow frantically arranged to retrieve the package before anyone discovered it was a bomb. The attempt had come within minutes of success, but ultimately failed due to mechanical problems beyond anyone's control. A week later, another conspirator tried again. On March 21, 1943, Colonel Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf volunteered to carry bombs during a memorial ceremony at the Jals in Berlin. Hitler was scheduled to spend 30 minutes viewing an exhibition of captured Soviet weapons. Gersdorf planned to use a 10-minute fuse, stand close to Hitler during the exhibition, and blow himself up along with the Führer. But Hitler rushed through the exhibition in only 2 minutes, far faster than his schedule indicated. Gersdorf barely had time to defuse the bombs in a bathroom before they exploded. Again, the conspiracy had come tantalizingly close to success, only to fail at the last moment due to unpredictable circumstances. Throughout 1943 and early 1944, the conspirators tried repeatedly to position someone close enough to Hitler with a weapon that could kill him. General Helmuth Stief, chief of organization in Army High Command, volunteered to carry a bomb to a uniform display Hitler was attending. At the last moment, Stief's smear failed and he backed out. Other officers who had access to Hitler either couldn't bring themselves to commit murder or were unable to carry weapons past increasingly tight security. The conspiracy needed someone with 3 rare qualities: access to Hitler, the courage to commit murder-suicide, and the physical ability to carry and arm a bomb despite tight security. They found that person in Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg. Stauffenberg was 36 years old in 1944, a decorated war hero from an aristocratic family with a long military tradition. He had been gravely wounded in Tunisia in April 1943 when his staff car was strafed by Allied fighters. The attack cost him his left eye, his right hand, and 2 fingers on his left hand. After months of recovery, Stauffenberg was appointed Chief of Staff of the Reserve Army, a position that gave him regular access to Hitler for briefings while also making him essential to implementing any coup after Hitler's death. Stauffenberg's appointment was a reward for his sacrifice and heroism. The regime had no idea it had just given a key position to a man who wanted Hitler dead. Stauffenberg brought new energy and urgency to the conspiracy. He refined the coup plan, codenamed Operation Valkyrie, after the Valkyries of Norse mythology who chose which warriors would die in battle. The plan exploited Hitler's own paranoia. Valkyrie was originally an emergency protocol Hitler had authorized to maintain order in case of internal uprising or Allied bombing that decapitated Nazi leadership. It gave the Reserve Army authority to take control of German cities, arrest Nazi officials, and establish martial law. Stauffenberg and his co-conspirators modified Valkyrie so that once Hitler was dead, they could activate it, claim the Nazis had attempted a coup, and use the Reserve Army to arrest actual Nazi leaders, including Himmler, Göring, and Goebbels. A new government would then negotiate peace with the Allies. It was an ambitious plan that required everything to go perfectly. Nothing went perfectly. On July 11, 1944, Stauffenberg attended a conference at the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat, near Berchtesgaden, carrying a bomb in his briefcase. The conspirators had decided that Himmler and Göring should also be killed to prevent them from rallying SS forces against the coup. But Himmler wasn't present at the conference, so Stauffenberg held back, waiting for another opportunity when all three could be killed together. On July 15th, Stauffenberg flew to the Wolfschanze, the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's military headquarters in East Prussia. Again, he carried a bomb. Again, Himmler was absent. Stauffenberg sent a coded message to Berlin that he would proceed anyway, but before he could arm the bomb, the conference was cancelled. The conspirators were becoming desperate. The Gestapo was closing in on them. Several members of their network had already been arrested. If they didn't act soon, the entire conspiracy would be exposed, and everyone involved would be executed. July 20th, 1944 was unbearably hot at the Wolfschanze complex, a cluster of concrete bunkers and wooden buildings hidden in the East Prussian forest. The daily situation conference was scheduled for 12:30 p.m. Stauffenberg arrived that morning accompanied by his aide, Lieutenant Werner von Heften. In Stauffenberg's briefcase was a British-made plastic explosive, one of two bombs they had brought. The plan was to use both bombs to ensure Hitler's death. The bombs had 10-minute chemical fuses activated by crushing a copper tube containing acid that would eat through wire holding back a firing pin. With his missing right hand and only 3 fingers on his left hand, Stauffenberg needed help to arm the bombs. Heften would assist him. At 12:30, as officers began gathering for the conference, Stauffenberg excused himself to use a washroom and quickly began arming the first bomb. He crushed the fuse, setting the 10-minute countdown in motion. A guard knocked on the door, telling him to hurry because the conference was about to begin. There wasn't time to arm the second bomb. Stauffenberg left Heften with the second bomb and returned to the conference room carrying only the single-armed device in his briefcase. It would have to be enough. The conference was being held not in the concrete Führer bunker as usual, but the Lagerbaracke, an above-ground wooden building. The change of venue was made because of the intense July heat. The wooden building had windows that could be opened for ventilation, unlike the sealed concrete bunker. This seemingly minor decision would save Hitler's life. In a concrete bunker, the bomb's blast would be contained and amplified, killing everyone inside. In a wooden building with open windows, much of the blast force would dissipate outward. Stauffenberg entered the conference room at 12:37 p.m. About 24 people were present, gathered round a large oak map table that dominated the room. Hitler stood near the middle of the table, leaning over maps showing the deteriorating military situation on the Eastern Front. Stauffenberg positioned himself as close to Hitler as possible and placed his briefcase under the table, pushing it toward Hitler's feet. Because of his injuries, Stauffenberg had been granted permission to sit near Hitler, with only one person between them. The briefcase was now less than 6 feet from the Führer. At 12:40, Stauffenberg excused himself, saying he needed to take a phone call from Berlin. He walked out of the conference room and headed toward a bunker about 200 meters away where he could observe the explosion. At exactly 12:42 p.m., the bomb detonated. The explosion was massive, far louder than anyone expected. Stauffenberg saw the wooden building erupt in smoke and debris. Pieces of the roof flew into the air. Flames shot from the windows. There was no possibility anyone inside had survived. He and Heften rushed to their car and bluffed their way through 3 security checkpoints, telling guards they had urgent business in Berlin and couldn't wait. By 1:15 p.m., they were airborne, flying toward Berlin to implement the coup. But Hitler was alive. In the 2 minutes between Stauffenberg leaving and the explosion, Colonel Heinz Brandt had moved Stauffenberg's briefcase. It was in his way as he tried to get closer to the map table. He pushed it to the far side of one of the table's massive oak support legs. This simple action, done without thought or knowledge of what was in the briefcase, placed a heavy oak beam between the bomb and Hitler. When the explosion came, the table leg absorbed much of the blast directed at Hitler. The open windows allowed the pressure wave to escape rather than reflecting back into the room.
4 men were killed immediately or died shortly after from their wounds. 20 others were injured, some severely. Hitler's trousers were shredded, his hair was singed, he suffered a perforated eardrum, conjunctivitis in both eyes, and numerous small wounds from wood splinters. But he was conscious and mobile. Within minutes, he was walking out of the ruined building under his own power. The confusion that followed doomed the coup. Stauffenberg, flying toward Berlin, believed Hitler was dead and that Valkyrie was being implemented. But in Berlin, the conspirators couldn't get confirmation of Hitler's death. General Friedrich Fromm, commander of the Reserve Army and the only person besides Hitler who could authorize Valkyrie, refused to act without proof. General Olbricht, one of the main conspirators, took the initiative and began issuing Valkyrie orders in Fromm's name at 4 p.m. Reserve Army units were ordered to seize control of government buildings and arrest Nazi officials. For a few hours, it looked like the coup might succeed, despite Hitler surviving. In Paris, the military governor of France, General Karl Heinrich Stulpnagel, successfully arrested over 1,200 SS and Gestapo personnel. In Berlin, Reserve Army units began moving toward key installations. But then, at 6:30 p.m., Hitler himself broadcast a radio message to the nation. His voice, unmistakable and angry, proved he was alive. The coup collapsed immediately. Officers who had been following Valkyrie orders realized they had been lied to and switched sides. Fromm, who knew about the conspiracy all along but tried to remain neutral, suddenly became aggressively loyal to Hitler, arresting the conspirators in his own headquarters to cover up his earlier complicity. By 11 p.m. on July 20th, Stauffenberg, Olbricht, and 2 other conspirators were standing before a makeshift firing squad in the courtyard of the Bendler Block, the Reserve Army headquarters in Berlin. Fromm had ordered their immediate execution to eliminate witnesses who could implicate him. Stauffenberg died shouting, "Long live sacred Germany." General Beck was allowed to commit suicide, though it took him 2 attempts and a coup de grace shot from a sergeant. The failed coup was over in less than 12 hours.
But Hitler's vengeance was just beginning. He ordered the arrest of everyone, even remotely connected to the plot. The Gestapo cast a wide net, arresting hundreds of people based on the flimsiest connections. Hitler personally ordered that the conspirators be denied military honors. They would be tried as common criminals before the People's Court, a Nazi kangaroo court where the verdict was predetermined and defendants were subjected to ritual humiliation. Judge Roland Freisler, the court's president, screamed abuse at defendants, many of whom appeared in court without belts or suspenders so their pants would fall down, creating photographs that made them look ridiculous and pathetic rather than heroic. The trials were filmed and shown to military units as warnings against disloyalty. General Erich Huppner, who had taken command of the Reserve Army during the coup attempt, was tried on August 7 and hanged the next day. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, Germany's most famous general, was implicated through his contacts with the conspirators. Hitler couldn't publicly execute Rommel, who was a national hero, so he gave him a choice: public trial and execution, with his family disgraced and pension stripped, or suicide with full military honors and family pension preserved. On October 14, 1944, Rommel took poison and died. His death was announced as resulting from wounds suffered in an Allied air attack. The executions were carried out at Plötzensee prison in Berlin. Hitler ordered that the condemned be hung on meat hooks with piano wire, strangled slowly rather than given a quick death by hanging. The executions were filmed so Hitler could watch them. Between July and April 1945, approximately 200 people connected to the plot were executed. Their families were arrested under the Nazi doctrine of Sippenhaft, kin liability, which held that family members shared responsibility for a relative's crimes. Wives, children, and elderly parents of conspirators were sent to concentration camps or given new identities and placed in orphanages. Henning von Treschow, the man who had attempted to kill Hitler with a bomb in 1943, was serving on the Eastern Front when he learned the July 20 plot had failed.
Knowing he would be arrested and tortured into revealing other conspirators, he walked to the front lines on July 21 and triggered a hand grenade, killing himself instantly. Before his death, he gave his aide a message that would become famous. The assassination must be attempted at any cost. Even if it fails, we must take action in Berlin, for the practical purpose no longer matters. What matters now is that the German resistance movement must take the plunge before the eyes of the world and of history. Compared to that, nothing else matters. The July 20 plot's failure had profound consequences for the war's final months. Hitler, paranoid before, became completely distrustful of the officer corps. He removed traditional military men from key positions and replaced them with Nazi loyalists. Heinrich Himmler, who had no military training, was appointed commander of the reserve army. Officers were now required to surrender their sidearms before entering Hitler's presence. The Wehrmacht was thoroughly Nazified in its final months, eliminating any possibility of the military acting independently to end the war. The failed plot also intensified the war. Historians estimate that most American soldiers who died in World War II died after July 20, 1944. Most of the material destruction in Europe occurred after that date. The Holocaust continued unabated through 1944 and into 1945, with thousands more murdered each day. Had the plot succeeded, Germany likely would have surrendered months earlier, saving hundreds of thousands of lives on all sides. The conspirators understood this. They knew their plot was militarily unnecessary. Germany had already lost the war by July 1944. But they believed they had a moral obligation to try to stop the killing, even if the attempt cost them their lives.
The moral legacy of Operation Valkyrie remains contested. The conspirators were not perfect heroes. Many had served Hitler loyally for years. Some had committed war crimes on the Eastern Front. Several were motivated not by opposition to Nazi atrocities, but by the pragmatic realization that Hitler was leading Germany to destruction. Yet they also deserve recognition for taking action when action was extraordinarily dangerous. They knew the plot would likely fail, and that failure meant certain death. They proceeded anyway because they believed Germany's honor required it. After the war, West Germany struggled with how to remember the July 20 conspirators. In the 1950s, many Germans viewed them as traitors who had violated their military oath. Conservative politicians argued they had stabbed Germany in the back during wartime. But gradually perceptions shifted. The conspirators came to be seen as heroes who had acted on conscience against tyranny. Schools, streets, and military installations were named after them. July 20 became a day of commemoration. The Bendler Block, where Stauffenberg was executed, became a memorial to the German resistance. Stauffenberg himself became an icon of military resistance to tyranny. The 2008 film Valkyrie, starring Tom Cruise, introduced his story to millions who had never heard of Operation Valkyrie. But the real Stauffenberg was more complicated than any movie could capture. He was a German nationalist who wanted to save Germany from destruction, not overthrow Nazism for moral reasons. He had initially supported Hitler's early policies. His opposition grew from witnessing the regime's increasing irrationality and incompetence rather than from moral revulsion at genocide. Yet he still took action when action was needed, knowing it would cost him his life. The July 20 plot represents both the courage and the limitations of military resistance to Hitler. The conspirators were willing to kill and die for their beliefs. They had access, resources, and detailed plans. They came within minutes and inches of success. But they also failed to understand that removing Hitler alone wouldn't be enough. The Nazi system was too deeply entrenched, with too many people invested in its continuation. Even if Hitler had died, Himmler or Goering might have taken over and continued the war.
The Wehrmacht officer corps, for all its members' private doubts, remained largely loyal to the regime until the very end. Today, a memorial stands in the Bendlerblock courtyard where Stauffenberg died. It's a simple monument, a bronze figure of a man with his hands bound, symbolizing the fate of all who resisted Hitler. Nearby, a plaque lists the names of those executed for the July 20 plot. Every year on July 20, Germany's defense minister gives a speech honoring the conspirators and reaffirming the principle that soldiers have a duty to disobey illegal orders. The ceremony reminds Germans and the world that not all Germans supported Hitler, that resistance existed even at the heart of the Nazi military machine. The men who almost killed Hitler paid for their courage with their lives, but they also left a legacy that transcends their failure. They proved that even in a totalitarian state, even under threat of death, some people will resist tyranny. They showed that military officers can place honor and conscience above obedience to orders. And they demonstrated that the attempt to do right matters even when the attempt fails. Claus von Stauffenberg placed a bomb under Hitler's table, knowing he might die in the explosion. When that wasn't necessary, he flew to Berlin to implement a coup, knowing it might fail. When it did fail, he faced a firing squad without recanting, dying with words of love for Germany on his lips. These were flawed men who had served an evil regime for years before finally acting against it. But in July 1944, they tried to kill Hitler and end the Nazi nightmare. They failed, but their attempt is remembered as one of the most significant acts of resistance in World War II history. The bomb that exploded at 12:42 p.m. on July 20, 1944, didn't kill Hitler, but it exploded into history, a reminder that even in the darkest times, some people will risk everything to do what they believe is right.